Tuesday because the volume is very low, but if you turn the gain up on your speakers or on your headphones, you should be able to hear it okay. Hopefully that's not going to happen today. That thing says it's operating correctly, so it might have been because I had the mic too low, but hopefully that'll turn out right. First spoiler alert. Second spoiler alert, your quiz is on today's lecture. It's all on Plato. All nuts and bolts, people. But you have to understand the language again. I'm going to go over a lot of language and some mechanisms of how he goes about developing his theory of what we're going to call, again, metaphysics. Everything is concerned with how we view the world and how the world is put together. We started at the beginning of the semester, I said that though we look at the same world, the West looks at it through a certain prism that's called reason and experimentation, and the East, starting next week, will look through it through another prism that's called intuition and interconnectedness. It's the same world, and we get answers because the world doesn't change. We just have different mechanisms for how we look at it. Today we're going to talk about Plato. When we talked about the West, we said there are two kinds of schools for how we look at the world. There are the rationalists who look at it through reason, and they believe that ideas are innate in us. They're built into us when we pop out of the oven. The other ones are empiricists. I have got way too much coffee in me. And if you remember right, they think that we're born as a blank slate, and then the world impresses itself on our perceptions, and we put information together that way. It is the same world. Both of these come with upsides, and both come with downsides. Everybody with me on that? Okay, Plato is a rationalist. He's kind of considered the father of Western thinking. There's some question about that now. A lot of the Greeks went to Alexandria in Egypt. They had a lot of interesting ideas. And if you ever take a class with Professor Insulaco, he'll tell you it goes back even further to India. There's obviously people moving throughout the world even back then, and a lot of ideas are exchanged. So today what I want to do is I want to sit down and go through Plato's metaphysics with you, how Plato views the world, okay? Metaphysics always asks the question, what's really real? Everybody, at least in the West, supposes that wisdom deals with first causes and the principles of things, and he proposes to study these causes and principles in his works. In other words, there's a cause for every consequence. Everything is produced by something that comes before it. We call that clockwork science, cause and effect. Of course, there's always the question, what started everything rolling, and where did that thing start from? Or does everything just go back ad infinitum, all the way back to no beginning? There's always a cause, and there's always an effect. So metaphysics constructs, criticizes theories about what is truly real. This question always gets asked. It's a ridiculous question, but it's worth asking. If a tree falls in a forest and nobody's there, does it make a sound? Now, we didn't go into Berkeley on Tuesday. We went through John Locke, and I purposely didn't go into Berkeley because he's as weird can get. Berkeley said if there's no one there to perceive it, it doesn't really exist. So if we all just magically on the East Coast sleep through sunrise so we don't perceive the sun coming up in the east, does that mean the sun didn't come up in the east? And rational people would say, what kind of thinking is that? Of course it did. Because the next day when we're all awake, we'll watch it come up, and the day after, and the day after. Okay? Is there a sound in the forest if no one's there to hear it? How do you know if you're not there to hear it? Well, it made a sound when I was there to hear it. Why wouldn't it make the same sound when I'm not there to hear it? So the philosopher will say, well, what proof do you have if you're not there that it made a sound? Well, that raises different questions. The very first day when I shared one of the philosophers with you, one of the videos, someone says, what causes cancer? And philosophers want to know what is a cause. So if a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? You have to ask yourself, what is sound? I mean, is sound kind of like an object that flows through the air and your ears catch it? Is that what sound is? Go ahead.
It's pressure because it's moving particles.
Anything more? You know what words are? Have you ever thought about this? Words are hot air. The physiology of words is that you breathe in, your diaphragm expands, and you suck air into your lungs, and then it contracts and it pushes up against your lungs, and the air goes up through your lungs, through your bronchial tubes, through your esophagus. You have two vocal cords next to your voice box. It reverberates, and then you have, we call it mandibles, your jaws, your tongue, your teeth, your lips, and then you have your sinus cavity, and this air comes out, and because you've learned to modulate the air, it comes out as a sound, and over time we learn to recognize the sound as words. Pero si yo empiezo a hablar en español, casi nadie puede comprenderme, porque no entiende las señas de mi boca. ¿Verdad? Those are the fundamentals of what words are. They're really just hot air because it's 98.7 in here supposedly, so when it pops out it's got a little heat to it. What is sound? Vibrations, airwaves moving through the air. When you talk on the cell phone, you're not hearing someone's talk. You're hearing sound that came out of their mouth, transmitted electronically through the air, and then reconstructed on the other end. You're not hearing their voice. But we say, well, yeah, I hear you. I hear you. No, you don't. Not like when we're in the room, but it's a reasonable facsimile. Guy gets weirder every day we come to class. Why is there something rather than no thing? We now believe 70% of the universe is made up of something called dark matter and dark energy, and no one's proved it, but we fundamentally believe it. What is no thing? You're involved in no thing every day and you have no comprehension. I don't mean that as a put down. You have no comprehension. These words can be read because the back is no thing. It's not nothing. It's no thing. It's in the contrast of the no thing to the thing that we see something. And we've been taught to make sense of it. When we get to Eastern philosophy next week and the week after, we'll talk about what the no thing is. Here's a cup. And what's the inside of the cup? The cup is the thing. What's the inside of the cup? An Eastern way of looking at it, it's a no thing. It's not nothing. It's a no thing. Without the emptiness, you couldn't have a cup. Of course, without a cup, you couldn't have the emptiness. This is the interconnectedness in how they look at the world. So we look at no thing and call it nothing, and they say no thing is something. It's part of their metaphysical world. It's a reality that we don't comprehend. We don't see it that way, but we don't deny it because we know it's got some validity. We talked about this on Tuesday. Is the world we experience real or an illusion? And a matrix. Is the matrix real? Aren't your dreams real? They're not really real. Of course, some people live in a dream world, schizophrenic maybe. They live in a different kind of reality. We don't necessarily comprehend it. Back in the day, they had something called the Hallmark movie theater, and they had a fellow in a schizophrenic hospital, and they were treating the fellow, and they thought maybe he could react with the normal people, so they send him to it was one of these diners right across the street, and the guy gets there. When it opens up, he walks in, and the owner says, "What can I do for you?" He says, "Give me a cup of coffee." Gave him a cup of coffee, and when he was all done, he gave the guy money for the coffee. All he had was a $20 bill. So he took out a $20 bill, and he gave it to him. And the guy looked at him and he says, "You're the first customer." He says, "Don't you have anything smaller?" So he took out a dollar bill and he said, "No." And he gave him back the $20 bill. Well, we look at that and say, "Are you serious?" Well, of course he was serious. His world doesn't quite operate the way ours does. Size to him is literally a structure of back and forth, top and bottom, side and what are time and space? How many of you see space? What is space when you see? That's a good answer. What is space when you don't ever be intimidated by me? What is space? How do you see space? Well, it's all around us, correct, but how do you see it? Can you put your hand on it? pencil, right? This is a pencil. It takes up space, but it's a pencil, it's not space. How about time? You guys don't use analog clocks anymore, do you? Oh, good for you. Wow. How about time? Can you see time? Can you spend time? Well, I spent all my time. Really? Time is a commodity then. Something we can acquire and something we can distribute. Is that what space and time are? Yet without space and time, we don't exist. Einstein said we live in a space-time continuum. Without that, there's no existence to us. What does that mean? What is space? What is time? Do you think something can come from nothing? What are ideas made of? Morpheus told Neo they're just electronic impulses that are the result of impressions of certain things that are on our sensory capacities, and then ideas grow out of them, like colors, like taste. Is nature all there is, or is there some sort of supernatural reality? Not necessarily a deity, but universal consciousness or being. We'll get into that when we get to the East. In other words, is this all there is? No, this isn't a negative. How many of you believe in supernatural? All major religions believe in something outside the material world that is more durable and will last, maybe eternal. I don't know what eternal means, but will last forever, will not have an end to it, rather than this construct that we live in here. This table eventually, 30, 40 years ago, will degrade. Cars all degrade. Everything that's material sooner or later degrades. And we have scientific evidence for the interaction of air and particles, and after a while it affects them, and everything goes through degradation. Plato will talk about that in a few minutes when I get to Plato. So for most of us in our world, this doesn't matter as long as life functions in a regular pattern. We get along real well, we go through life, and it really doesn't matter. The reason we go over it in intro is because it gives you a chance to regulate your thought. It gives you a chance to take a look at the world in a new way. It may or may not have any difference in the short run or in the long run of your life. Some of you will learn these mechanisms and these tools, and you'll apply them. Did you ever see the movie A Beautiful Mind? And John Nash invents this theory that he thinks just has to do with, I think it was with economics, and it turns out they use it for everything. He's a brilliant man and didn't know how brilliant he was. He just happened to invent a formula that worked, and it worked for economics, and we found out we could use it for all other things as well. You may be in that category and not know it. I don't know that John Nash knew about it. In fact, in the movie, if the movie is true at all to any reality of what his life really lived like, he was the last one in his class of graduate students to come up with a theory to get his PhD. Of course, he was schizophrenic. He had different realities than we do, and yet he came up with a theory that applies to our world every day. So in philosophy, then, the reason we do this, people, is it's useful. You may not find a use to it today, you may not find a use to it any time in your life, but you may find sooner or later that this produces a usefulness to you, and so we want to at least introduce you to it. So Plato's metaphysics is this.